The Battle of Stalingrad stands as a pivotal moment in World War II. It was one of the deadliest battles in history, with an estimated 2 million casualties. From August 1942 to February 1943, the German and Soviet armies clashed in and around the city. The battle was characterized by fierce close-quarters combat and direct assaults on civilians by air raids. This battle marked a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The Soviet victory ended the German advance into the Soviet Union and marked the beginning of the push towards Germany. It is remembered for its brutality, its immense human cost, and its strategic significance. The harsh winter, starvation, and constant bombardment made survival a daily struggle for both soldiers and civilians. The city of Stalingrad, named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The name itself carried immense propaganda value, motivating Soviet troops to defend it at all costs. The battle was more than just a fight for territory. It became a struggle for survival. The determination of the Soviet forces to hold the city against overwhelming odds became legendary. Both sides poured resources and manpower into the fight, with horrific consequences. The Germans committed their Sixth Army, while the Soviets mobilized every available resource to defend the city. The battleground was a scene of urban warfare on an unprecedented scale. The city's infrastructure was systematically destroyed, turning it into a labyrinth of ruins. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and streets became battlefields. Every corner, every building, and every street was contested fiercely. The fighting was hand to hand, block by block, street by street. Soldiers fought in the sewers, in the ruins of factories, and in the remains of homes. The Battle of Stalingrad would leave an indelible mark on the course of the war and the history of the 20th century. It was a testament to the resilience and determination of the human spirit. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. The legacy of Stalingrad continues to be a powerful symbol of endurance and sacrifice. In the summer of 1942, the German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, advanced towards Stalingrad. This marked the beginning of one of the most brutal and pivotal battles of World War II. Their goal was to capture the city and gain control of the Volga River, a vital transportation route for the Soviet Union. Control of the river would cut off Soviet supply lines and cripple their ability to move resources. The Germans were confident in their ability to capture the city quickly. They believed their superior tactics and firepower would overwhelm the Soviet defenses in a matter of weeks. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, began a relentless bombing campaign. This aerial assault was designed to soften up the Soviet defenses and pave the way for the ground troops. They targeted the city's infrastructure, including factories, warehouses, and residential areas. The aim was to destroy the Soviet industrial capacity and demoralize the civilian population. The bombing raids caused widespread destruction and heavy civilian casualties. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the once bustling city was turned into a landscape of devastation. The Soviet defenses were initially weak. The Red Army was caught off guard by the intensity and speed of the German advance. They were caught off guard by the ferocity of the German attack. The rapid advance of the German troops left the Soviet forces scrambling to mount an effective defense. However, the Soviets were determined to defend the city bearing Stalin's name. The symbolic importance of Stalingrad meant that surrender was not an option. They poured reinforcements into Stalingrad, including factory workers and civilians. Everyone who could hold a rifle was called upon to defend the city. The Germans made steady progress in the early stages of the battle. Their initial successes gave them control over significant portions of the city. They captured key points in and around the city, pushing the Soviet defenders back towards the Volga River. The strategic locations fell one by one to the advancing German forces. The situation for the Soviets was becoming increasingly desperate. Despite their determination, the relentless German assault was taking a heavy toll on both soldiers and civilians alike. By September 1942, the battle for Stalingrad had reached its peak. The Germans had fought their way into the city centre, but their advance was slowing. Soviet resistance was stiffening, and the Germans were drawn into brutal street fighting. The fighting inside Stalingrad was some of the most intense and savage of the entire war. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand in bombed-out buildings and amidst the rubble-strewn streets. Snipers picked off soldiers from both sides, and every inch of ground was fiercely contested. The Luftwaffe continued its bombing campaign, reducing much of the city to rubble. The constant shelling and aerial bombardment created a nightmarish environment for both soldiers and civilians trapped in the city. Despite the horrific conditions, the Soviet defenders held on. They were inspired by calls to defend the city to the death. Their resistance, often led by junior officers and NCOs, frustrated the German advance. Section 4. Holding the line. October to November 1942. Throughout October and November, the battle raged on. The Germans controlled most of the city, but the Soviets clung tenaciously to their remaining positions. They launched counterattacks whenever possible, inflicting heavy casualties on the Germans. The Volga River became a lifeline for the Soviet defenders. At night, under constant German bombardment, small boats would ferry supplies, reinforcements, and evacuate the wounded across the river. The weather began to turn colder, and winter set in. Temperatures plummeted, and the fighting conditions became even more brutal. Soldiers on both sides suffered from frostbite, and the cold added to the misery of the battle. The Germans were ill-prepared for the harsh Russian winter. Their equipment was not designed for such extreme cold, and their supply lines were stretched thin. The Soviet defenders, used to the cold, were in a slightly better position. Section 5, Operation Uranus, the Soviet Counteroffensive. While the Germans were bogged down in the brutal urban combat of Stalingrad, the Soviets were meticulously planning a massive counteroffensive that would change the course of the war. Operation Uranus, as it was called, aimed to encircle and trap the German Sixth Army inside the city, cutting them off from reinforcements and supplies. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched their meticulously planned attack with overwhelming force. They struck the weak flanks of the German army, which were held by Romanian and Italian troops who were not as well equipped or prepared for the ferocity of the Soviet assault. The Axis forces, ill-equipped and demoralized, were quickly overrun by the relentless Soviet advance, leading to significant losses and surrenders. The Soviet pincers met at Kalach on November 23rd, effectively closing the trap on the German Sixth Army and sealing their fate. General Paulus, realizing the dire situation, requested permission from Hitler to break out of the encirclement, but his request was denied by the Führer. Hitler was determined to hold Stalingrad at all costs, believing that surrender was not an option and that the city was of immense strategic and symbolic importance. The encirclement of the German Sixth Army marked a major turning point in the Battle of Stalingrad and the broader war on the Eastern Front, showcasing the resilience and strategic prowess of the Soviet forces. The Germans, now on the defensive, faced the grim prospect of a major defeat, as the momentum had shifted decisively in favor of the Soviet Union, altering the trajectory of the war.